Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do the first part of a series I'm going to do on the very basics of Napoleonic wargaming, because I think as a period it can be quite intimidating to people either starting with the new period or starting historical wargaming or even wargaming in general. There's a lot of different terms out there and very confusing. They're very easy to get mixed up. I know when I was younger trying to get into the period it was quite confusing to me sometimes. I'm going to break down the different armies and I want to go through their units, their tactics and things like that. I'm not going to do it necessarily in relation to Black Powder yet, but I think I'll come on and do a tactics video for the different nations using that rule set, and hopefully it'll be usable with other rule sets as well. So today, as you can see from the pictures on the screen right now, I'm going to start off with the British. What we can see here are 4 line infantrymen. These ones come from the Connaught Rangers, which obviously an Irish regiment, up to about a fifth or a quarter of soldiers in the British Army were Irish. Not always in Irish regiments, a lot of them were in so-called English ones. The Connaughts were raised in Ireland. They were part of the Picton's division, the Fighting Irish, they were known. And what you can see there is 4 figures. Now, that roughly represents a company. So, a company was the smallest tactical unit of a Napoleonic army, particularly the British Army. And 10 of these would make up a battalion. Now, a company on paper had 100 men. So 10 of companies means 1,000 men per battalion. I don't think I've ever seen an order of battle that has a British battalion of more than 500 men. So they're slightly overrepresented. That would be a little bit more than a company that's on that one base. But I think it works for, modelling the units and things like that. So as you can see, that is a line company. And in my army, 6 of those make up an English battalion. So I'll just assemble the rest of the battalion. Okay, so we can see the rest of the battalion has been assembled around them. Now, a British battalion, as I said, had 10 companies. 8 of those were the so-called centre companies. And they'd be, 80% of the soldiers. They'd be your basic infantrymen, each armed with a Brown Bess musket. And they would provide the majority of firepower for the battalion. At each end of that is what's known as a flank company, or sometimes called an elite company. Usually in the British Army is a flank company. And each battalion had 2 flank companies. Makes sense, one for each flank really. So the first one is the one that's nearest here. Now these would occupy the right of the line, which was always considered to be the area of most prestige. And this would be the Grenadier Company. I'm going to slightly move it so the camera focuses on them. There we are. That's the Grenadier Company there. Now those guys are the biggest and the toughest fighters of the battalion. And they would sometimes be, brigaded together. I'm going to try and steer away from that word if I can, because it means something else that we'll discuss in a bit. But they would be joined with the Grenadier companies of all the other battalions, and they would be used as either shock troops, a elite reserve, or if there was, for argument's sake, a armoured position that needed defended position that needed storming, something like a fortress or maybe a fortified farm, something like that, then it could be the Grenadier companies that would take part in that storming. They're called Grenadiers because they were originally armed with grenades, certainly around the American War of Independence time. They're the guys with the big tall brass miters you might have seen. And they would have very simple grenades. They got rid of them by the Napoleonic War, so I'm not entirely sure why. So if anyone knows, then stick it in the comments. I'd be really interested to find out, because they seem pretty good to me. I don't know, maybe it was a range issue or something. I don't really know. So that's the Grenadier Company. And then at the other end of the line, knock the camera there. The other end of the line, we have these guys. This is the Light Company. Now these were, in contrast to the Grenadiers, these were the smallest, most agile members of the battalion. And they would go in there and they would often act with a little bit of their own initiative. Not a huge amount, certainly not as much as we think of soldiers today. But they would often skirmish in front of their battalion and just try and disrupt the enemy as they came towards them. So their job, anyone who's seen Sharp, now they're rifles, but he is technically the light company officer there. So, you know, it would be those sort of scouting roles if the battalion was working independently, which wouldn't happen very often. But it would cover the flanks during a march or scout ahead of them on the battlefield and things like that. In the run-up to the Battle of Salamanca, there was a lot of manoeuvre and counter-manoeuvre, and it will have been the light companies, in addition to the cavalry as well, that fed back to their battalions and then from their battalions back to the general staff about sort of where the enemy were and scouting locations and things like that. So that's the basic makeup of a battalion. Now, the British, unlike most armies, in fact, I think potentially uniquely in the Napoleonic Wars, only put one battalion into the field per regiment. So each regiment had 2 battalions, and that's often written with a 1 or a 2, and then slash, and then the number of the regiment. So, for argument's sake, the King's Regiment were the 8th Regiment. So the 1st Battalion Kings would be written down 1/8th. So 1st Battalion, 8th Regiment is how that's worked out. Now, like I say, they only really put 1 battalion in the field. There's a couple of instances where you see the 2nd Battalion, but usually the 1st Battalion would be back at home in that case. But most regiments, certainly in the Peninsular War, put out their 1st Battalion. The 2nd Battalion's job was to stay at home and be the recruitment centre for their respective regiment. So you've got 10 companies, makes up a battalion. Each company's got 100 men in on paper. In reality, it probably had nearer 40 or 50. So 10 of those make a battalion. 2 flank companies, a grenadier company and a light company, and then 8 centre companies makes up a battalion. 2 battalions make up a regiment, but in the British Army's case, very, very rarely did you see the 2nd Battalion in the field. They normally stayed at home, recruited and trained their troops. When we look at some other nations, particularly the French, we'll see that they had a lot more than 1 battalion in the field. Now, I think one of the reasons why this adds to confusion is because, certainly I'm very guilty of it, a British battalion I'll often call a regiment, because the 2nd Battalion was nowhere to be seen. So that's not strictly the case. A battalion, or rather a number of battalions, make up a regiment. So for the British it was 2, for the Russians it was 3, and for the French it was up to 6, sometimes 7, sometimes 8. So that's company, that's a battalion, and that's a regiment. Now the next stage up from that is the sort of the main building block of part of a black powder army. That's a brigade. So I'll just pause the video here and set up the rest of the brigade, and then we'll have a look at how that goes. So I've set up the rest of the brigade that I use with my Connaught Rangers there. So the Connaught Rangers are at the back left, as we can see, and then in front of those we've got the 33rd of Foot. To the right of them we've got the 8th, and then behind them, the back right-hand unit is a Portuguese battalion. Now, that often happened in British brigades in the Peninsular War. They would have 3 British battalions, and then the 4th one would be made up of a Portuguese unit. And that was designed to help bolster the Portuguese units, because they were not as tested as the British ones. And also it was helped to integrate them into the British method of fighting, which was obviously in 2 ranks. They wouldn't use the mass columns like the French and things like that. So for black powder, this is often what I would take in a British brigade. I've got 3 British regiments or 3 British battalions, and a Portuguese battalion behind them. And in the middle is a general officer. In this case, it's General Hill. But a brigadier would probably either be a brigadier, potentially a major general, maybe even a senior colonel as well. So a brigade was not necessarily a fixed formation. It was fairly rigid in the British Army. And it was normally at this level that units would be asked to do tasks. An individual battalion was very rarely asked to do something. An individual company, even more rarely than that. This is kind of the basic tactical unit in the Napoleonic Wars. You can see the detritus on my wargame table at the back there. I'll need to sort that out before our next video. So that's basically where we come with the British. So we've got a company, 10 of those make up a battalion, and then 2 battalions make up a regiment. However, for the British in particular, the battalions were usually only 1 battalion in the field, and then the other stayed at home. As I said before, when we get to the other nations, particularly the French, we'll see that there's usually a lot more than 1 battalion in the field. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Like I said, this is going to be the start of a series on basic information about Napoleonic armies. If you'd like to see more of this content, please let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. Bye. The British Army would fight in 2 main formations, really. The one that we can see here is the line. Now, this was the formation the British Army would usually adopt when fighting. They were 2 men deep, so just one guy behind the other, and as long as they needed to be, depending on how many guys are in that regiment. What you often would have seen would have been the light company. These guys would be deployed in skirmish order in front of the battalion. And that would, as I said early on, disrupt any attacking French units, hopefully. Sniping officers, making them stumble over wounded colleagues, things like that. And then when the column got close, they'd rejoin the unit and they would fight there as normal. The other formation they would use would be what's known as column of march. Now on the wargaming table, that can be represented in probably 2 ways, most commonly. Either 2 wide like so, or potentially even 1 wide like that. And that was used mainly for moving down roads, deploying, things like that. Moving a column of troops is actually a very efficient way of moving troops around. A line's actually quite difficult to maintain control of. For that reason, sergeants and some officers would be behind the 2 ranks of troops to what was known as dress the ranks, and that was to make sure that they kept in line and they kept their formations together. The other formation that they would use was one that all units, all armies would use, and that's the square. I'm not going to discuss that here because I'm going to do an entire separate video on the square, what its use was, why it was used, things like that. It's probably one of the most famous images of the British Army is from the film Waterloo, when they've got a helicopter shot of the French cavalry charging all the British squares and things like that. So I'm going to do a separate video on squares. I just wanted to quickly cover off the formations that the British used in the field. Mostly line, or as you can see here, the column as well. Black powder wise, the line gives you maximum firepower, column gives you reliable, and if you're on a road, you get +2 to your command, so it's even better for that. Okay, so that's it. Like I said at the end of the video, please like, share and subscribe if you enjoy the content and want to see more. Next up, I think I'm probably going to do the Russians. I might save the French for last. If you've got any ideas, any videos that you'd want to see, please let me know. And thank you very much for watching.